All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us for week 3 of MeadCon online. So today we have two presentations right now at 8:30 and another one at 10 p.m. So I just wanted to welcome everybody into the presentation for tonight. We're going to ask that everybody keep their video turned off to help reduce any potential lag for the connection. Feel free to ask any questions in the live chat. Those will be moderated and brought up during the presentation to ask to our presenters. This and every session is also being recorded for later access on our website. So after the conference is over in its completion, we'll have all the video and audio recordings available on the AMMA's website for all the ticket holders to be able to access whenever they like. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Scot Scharr and Bob Slanzi. They will be presenting today on making Polish meads, and I believe they're the only two Americans with Polish passports as well. So, all right, so they are they're ready to go. So I'm going to let you guys rip and do your thing. So, thanks, guys.
Thank you, Sergio. I'm Bob Slanzi. I'm president of the Homebrewers Committee for the AMMA, and I invited Scot Scharr to come on tonight, and we're going to talk about Polish meads.
So I'm Scot Scharr, and I've been homebrewing for 20-some years. I'm currently the head brewer at Crawford Brew Works in Bettendorf, Iowa. Been making mead for a good number of years. Fairly new to the Polish game and kind of jumped into it with both feet and never looked back. Just kind of really fell in love with that style, and it's kind of how Bobby and I kind of got together, is like hanging out with the Polish guys out at Mazer Cup, and they kind of took us under their wing and adopted us and gave us passports, and here we are.
Yeah, and I really love those guys. They're really passionate about what they do, and they bring a whole new dynamic to the Mazer Cup coming, and to see what other guys are doing on a different continent. So Scott and I talked a little about yesterday. He has all the names of the Polish meads much better than I do. So we're going to go through this now, and we're going to explain the 3 traditional styles of Polish mead. Okay. Scott?
Yeah, I'll pronounce them, and then you can describe them. The Poltrak would be the lightest one. So you got the dynamic of that.
So the Poltrak is actually, the rough translation is half. So it's 2 parts honey to 1 part water.
Right. And as we would look at it, it looks like Dwajniak, but the best I can get from the Polish from listening to it is Juniak, is the closest I can get to that pronunciation. And
that would be double, which is 1 part honey to 2 parts water.
And then the Troniak
is 50-50 split.
Right.
1 to 1.
And that's what, like we were talking to, that's volume. That's not weight. You know,
so if you were making a 2 to 1, it would be 24 pounds of honey to 4 gallons of water. It's definitely by volume, not weight, where the water would be 32 pounds and honey would be 24 pounds.
Right. I think a lot of people get a little confused on that one. And I think there's a lot of confusion, at least there was for me, that all Polish meads are super high alcohol, and that's really not the case. I mean, they're definitely, those 3 styles are absolutely much sweeter than what we normally drink here, but they're not cloyingly sweet. It doesn't leave you like with honey hanging in your mouth, and they're not, that strong. I mean, you're not going to pound, 3 bottles watching the football game, but it's not like drinking spirits. Some people, I think it kind of gets tied into like Viking's blood and some of those really strong ones, and that's really not the case.
No, those are fortified. And what I'd like to say is that what a lot of people don't realize, that there's a lot of balance here. Now, when you look at, 1 part honey to 2 parts water, you're looking at, on a 6-gallon batch, 24 pounds of honey. So you're looking at a gravity that might be between, 1.140 and 1.150. So if you were to use an aggressive yeast strain like Uvaverm 43, that's my go-to yeast for these. you're looking at a yeast that can go to 18%. So you're looking at something that could chew out, 125, 127 points, 130 points, all depending on how vigorous your fermentation is. And now you're looking at a residual sugar that could be between 1010 and 1020. So if you're going to have that high of alcohol, it really doesn't balance against that low sugar.
Right.
The residual sugar. So let's say you only got it to go to 15%. So you're knocking off 110 points. And now you have a 1030 left over for a balance, which the residual sugar would be right in line.
Right. It is a much more like pleasant product, something you
Absolutely.
would much rather drink.
So Scott and I spoke, and we do different things. And I pretty much start off with all my honey in the primary, where Scott step feeds. Am I correct?
On the higher ones.
On
Yeah.
some, on the higher ones. I prefer to do it all at once. So the highest that I have gotten without step feeding has been estimated gravity of, it was half honey, half water. The estimated gravity was 1.223. So what I did was I used about 4 to 5 grams of yeast per gallon. I also rehydrated using Go Firm. And I do this at a very low temperature. I do this while my basement is between like 56 and 60 degrees. And I want to keep it in that. And what I do is I stretch out my primary fermentation over double what I would use for regular mead. Because of the low fermentation, I feel that the yeast is moving at a good rate, and I want to keep the aromatics. I don't want it to chew through the sugars too fast. I don't want to overfeed it. So I figure by keeping it low and keeping it steady, I feel that I get a better product. And that's just what I do personally.
Absolutely. And I agree, I definitely agree with the lower fermentation temperature. I've got a really high-tech system that I use. I have a concrete basement floor. And in the summer, I set it right on the concrete. And then in the winter, when it gets colder, I set it up on some 2x4s. So it's pretty high-tech, and it, fairly expensive to get that going. But that's heavy sarcasm right there. I mean, you don't need a lot of expensive equipment to do this. I mean, like I said, I have an unfinished basement. House was built like almost 100 years ago. And like I said, the concrete floor, if it gets too cold for that, I just set it up on some boards to get it off the floor and keeps it nice. Like I would say I'm usually in the low 60s is where I'm at. And usually I have pretty good luck with that. And my step feeding process is going to change because I got some hints from Merrick that I'm sworn to secrecy on, though I want to give those a try before I do it on his yeast handling method, but I'm not allowed to.
You don't want to share them here?
What's that?
You sure you don't want to share them with us here?
I want to get more tips from Merrick, so I don't want to upset him. But yeah, I've only done the step feeding a few times, and it was very unscientific. I'm not sure that I'm that thrilled with the results of it, but I typically try to stay in like the Juniac range. And I'll start out like 1180, and I can get the Uniform 43 to chew through that. And it comes about right where I want it. Ends up about 1020 to 1030 sometimes even. It's fairly sweet.
Yeah, so I think that most of the guys who are really coming up with a good Polish mead, a lot of them are using the Uniform 43. Have you been using anything else, Scott?
Not on my Polish, I have not.
No, I've basically been sticking with that. I have used VRB for a buckwheat cherry that I did, and I really liked that, and that was about 1190 I estimated the sugars at. And I had no problem with that. I really liked it. I think Sergio made a great post on it. A couple months ago on Modern Mead Makers, and I had no problem going with that. And what I did was I used 1 part honey and I used 2 parts juice to really come with that. So I used the cherry juice And I look at it like this. If I go to a store and I'm going to use a juice from a store, I might buy 1 quart of that juice and I'll see what a gravity is. And if the gravity is 1060, I will get concentrate and I will, formulate the other 4 gallons I want at 1060.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll use the 2 gallons of honey to come up with that Polish style with the fruit.
Right.
And that's usually the way I do it. So I have an idea of what's going in there. I just don't want to put in concentrate and water. I would brew the juice first, unfermented, and then add it to the honey, or add the honey to the juice, however I'm doing it.
Yeah, I definitely like most of my fruits, or I would say almost all my fruits and other additions in my Polish are always like more in the secondary or in the tail end of primary fermentation. Because I just want to concentrate on keeping that honey going and making sure the fermentation is going well. And then I start worrying about adding the other things to it later. Because I think it's too easy to get sidetracked if you add a lot of different things all at once.
Well, the spices I would definitely put in the back end after the primary's done. Most likely after the secondary's done too.
Right.
After it's transferred, I would probably go before bottling.
But even any fruits that I add are usually late primary. I don't put them in right away. I wait till fermentation is going fairly well, and then I'll add them.
We have a question here from Amy Olson. Is actually
I don't like Amy.
No, not her.
Well, ladies first. So, man, she didn't have the first question, but she goes first. Do you use nutrients other than? She's asking, do you use nutrients other than the Go Firm? So, in other words, what is your normal nutrient regimen process for Polish style meads?
Mine are pretty much the same way as I do my other meads, and I have never really got on the Fermaid O. When I started out, I used Go Firm in my initial pitch, and then I used DAP and Fermaid K in 4 different editions, usually every 2 days. I'll do 4 editions, 48 hours and 2 days after that, and 2 days after that, 2 days after that. I'm kind of the old dog that doesn't like to learn new tricks. I started out with those. I was happy with the results. And I guess the only reason anyone ever said anything about changing is because you could get it done faster. And I'm really not in a hurry, especially on the Polish meads. I'm not really worried about it. So that's just what I've done. I basically do those the same way I do with all my other meads.
So I do 5 editions, 60 hours apart. I break it up into 5 editions. So the first one is 1/3 of the total nutrients. And then every 60 hours, I go with 1/6.
Okay.
And the reason I do that is I feel that the yeast the most is going to happen in the first couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the fermentation. So why wouldn't most of the nutrients go in the first couple of days?
That's just a lot of math, Bob.
I know. Well, I don't really use a calculator or anything like that. And Sergio will tell you that I can just pop numbers out of the top of my head. So everything I do is like that. I don't write anything down. I have no written recipes unless somebody wants to do something, and then I'll do a recipe and I'll actually have to take measurements.
Right.
And I
have another question here from Bob.
Fermaid K and DAP.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I have another question from Josh Holbrook. He says, is there typically much acid in Polish meads, or is it mostly a sweetness versus alcohol balance?
I would say they're fairly well balanced across the board, especially when you get the ones where there's fruits and stuff added into them. I would say maybe heavier on tannins than acid.
I would definitely agree with that. I would definitely
I guess I would go that way, more balanced with tannins than acid. There's very few of the really good ones I have there that weren't oaked in some way, that hadn't spent some time on wood.
So you guys are saying basically you're oak aging or oak fermenting most of these Polish meads that you're making?
And mine usually have some sort of oak character to them. I try to.
I would agree with
Not
that.
necessarily barrel aged, but I mean, there's other ways, you know, there's spirals, there's chips, there's different ways to do it. You can have put meat in a barrel and forgot about it for 4 years. Like I know somebody who did that. And so now I have some really heavily oaked wildflower mead that I can add to things and add some oak character to it. So.
All right, we have another question from Dan at Spacetime Mead and Cider. He asks, what makes a Polish mead other than simply the honey to water proportions?
That's pretty much it. That's the style, the 3 styles.
In a lot of the traditional ones, especially like the guys from Poland, the ones I've had there, almost the majority of them have buckwheat in it. There's a lot of buckwheat used in them. And it's that, and I'd say they're almost all oaked. I was one meadery I visited over there, and they don't send anything out unless it's at least 3 years old. That's the youngest thing they send out is 3 years old.
I think that they do have an age requirement also over there.
They do, but it's not that long. I mean, that was even long for them. I don't believe that they all have to be 3. But
no, I think the Poltreks have to be longer. I know somebody was saying.
I mean, yeah. But I mean, this was even like their Juniac and some of the lighter ones.
All right, and another question from Josh Holbrook. How are fruits typically featured in Polish meads? Are most of them melomels?
I would say yes. And
I would agree.
I guess one thing that I noticed, and I was really trying to think today about, what kind of differentiates the way that they do it. And the aging is part of it. And like, it seems like, especially in the home ones here, it's like you have to have this really fresh honey character and you have to have this really bright fruit character with it. And for some reason, and I think it's because a lot of mead makers, and I include myself in this, came from beer and home brewing, everyone gets hammered into them that oxidation is bad. You got to avoid oxidation at all costs, never do that. Whereas a lot of the meads there have some oxidation in it, and it's maybe not as bright of a fruit character, but that doesn't mean it's not good. I mean, so that oxidation, I mean, you can get some of those sherry notes and stuff like that, just add some complexity. The oak adds some complexity to it instead of just being like super cleanly fermented honey and a real bright fruit character, which I think is what we see a lot here, especially in the home division, where I think some of them do a better job of layering flavors. And to me, that's kind of what makes, like, you go to Mazer Cup and the meads that win, the guys from Poland, I think they get that. I think, they just add some of those extra flavors into it, and it just adds more dimensions and it's more interesting.
Yeah, their intensity seems to be dialed up.
Mm-hmm.
The intensity of the mead. And it's, I wouldn't be surprised if they're adding 3 or 4 different kinds of cherries to get those layers in there, and, they also blend a lot of honey. They have those different buckwheats that we don't have.
Right. I mean, that's kind of one thing that I just started doing within the last several years is blending honey. And it's such a great tool to have, in your toolbox to work with. And it was kind of one of those, epiphany moments. I'm like, well, when I'm brewing, I'm adding all these different malts to get the flavor profile that I want. Why wouldn't I do that with honeys? And it's, it just makes such a great product when you do it that way. And it's a lot of fun to mess with.
Oh, if you have a vision, I think you should definitely follow it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you feel that blending the honey is the way to get a better product, absolutely, you should try it.
Well, maybe not even necessarily better, but the product you're looking for.
Well, that's a better way to say it, yes.
Yeah.
Your end product, let's say that.
Yeah. I mean, like the one I'm drinking right now, so Droniak, it's a blend of buckwheat and bamboo honey. I didn't want, that intensity of just all buckwheat. So I added some of the bamboo. And yes, someone's going to tell me it's Japanese knotweed. It's not bamboo, but I just really like, they're both dark flavors. There's some similarities, but it's just not quite as, I guess, buckwheaty, I guess, if that's the way you want it. And it works really well with dark fruits.
And just to clarify, when you guys are referring to buckwheat, you guys are referring more to the eastern buckwheat, the more barnyard farmhouse buckwheat, correct?
Well, it depends on what you can get. I mean, the one I have right now is West Coast, and I think you can get to the same place with the East Coast. You just have to let it set. I mean, it will age out, but I think to me, you can't drink it as fast unless that's what you really like. And the one
acquired taste.
It is, and the buckwheat you get in Poland is different than either one of those.
Their buckwheat's really nice.
It is. It's different than our East Coast or West Coast. It's very different.
Absolutely. And when you talk to those guys, they only have 5 or 6 varietals that they really get over there. They don't have the varietals like we get.
No.
So they have, I'm pretty sure, linden, wildflower.
Yeah, was it multi-flower or multi-something they call it? And sunflower they get a lot of. Yes.
But they don't have the huge things like we have all these sales and, we get Z specialty and B seasonal. They don't have it like that. Mm-hmm. They have less than 10 varietals and they work everything out of those varietals.
Right.
And one thing that, everyone talks about is, like the fruit character and which fruit. Traditional Polish styles would probably use the traditional fruits that they could grow.
Right.
So there would probably be currants, raspberries, the berries over there, cherries. Mm-hmm. But they're not going to get, can you make a Polish mead from pineapple? You probably could, but would it be a traditional Polish mead? Or mango?
Right.
Or passion fruit. And so, as we get into this and, guys are doing different things and higher gravities, and I love to push into different realms where, flavors might go together or things like that. I think we're going to see a lot more come up, with Polish, with different, guys putting that under the Polish category with different flavors coming through.
Right.
Yeah. Now we're talking about craft Polish meaderies. Here's a question from Josh Holbrook. He says, I know this will likely be covered later, but in a competition setting, what are the hallmarks of the Polish style? What should a judge be looking for? Is it a negative if oxidative notes are not noticeable? So on and so forth. So
I wouldn't necessarily call it a negative, but you get more judges that are going to call it a negative if it is there, which I think is wrong. I mean, some like, oh, it's oxidized. Well, yeah, okay, it's supposed to be. We've got 2 Polish sitting here in fermenters now that are in the secondaries. They're only about 2/3 full. I'm leaving all that headspace because I want some of that oxidized character in it. I'm not going to leave them there for 5 years that way, but I want to get some of that oxidized character in. Like a lot of my Polish ones, I had walnuts too, because I think that adds kind of that, it gives it kind of an older, almost like mimics an oxidation character as well, that you can get to it. And to me, like if you're looking at the hallmark of it, it has to be much more complex. There's got to be, you have to have the tannins coming from somewhere, if not from oak or from some fruit or something. You don't want, you have to have some residual sugar. You don't want it cloying, and you also don't want it like super high alcohol. I hope that somewhat answers the question.
Well, I think the oxidation has to be pleasant.
Oh, absolutely.
If the oxidation is not pleasant or it doesn't contribute to the overall taste and the complexity of it, then I could see it dinged. But if it was missing, I wouldn't take it off.
Exactly. But there are some judges that if there's any oxidation whatsoever, that they just count that as a flaw. And that's what I'm saying is that need to get away from that.
Oh, I agree with that totally.
So what would you say most of your Polish meads start and finish at as far as gravities go?
Mine are typically about 1180 and finish in the mid 20s to maybe 1030.
I've had some ones that I've done a little bigger.
Oh, yours is bigger, huh? Is that what you're saying?
No, mine's really small. But my initial gravity is higher.
Okay.
But I have some that finish at 1040, 1060, I would estimate.
Mm-hmm.
But if you barrel age them and you have the oak, they actually drink like they're a little bit drier, but you still get that big mouth feel on them. And I've done the 1-to-1, and the 1-to-1, the initial gravity I guesstimated at on paper was 1.223. So I feel that I got all I could out of the yeast. So even coming down 150 points, I would still be at about 1075.
Mm-hmm.
So to think about something that's 1075 with that's possibly between 18 and 20%, is bigger better? Well, you need that high alcohol to balance against that high residual sweetness.
Right.
And if the lower you go with the residual sweetness, the lower you can go with the alcohol. Mm-hmm. You're not going to balance something that's 1060 residual sugar with 9% alcohol. It's just not going to taste right. At least that's my opinion.
All right, I have another question from Joe Lee. He's asking, have either of you ever made a Poltorak? Basically a 2-part honey to 1-part water.
Yes.
I probably have, but I didn't know what it was called at the time.
You want to speak to that, Bobby?
Yeah, I've done it. And it's still going. It's been going for about 18 months. There's still some honey on the bottom of the primary fermenter. I didn't feel that agitating it would be the best for it because I felt that it would bring the gravity so high that the yeast wouldn't be able to take off. So I put a little honey in the fermenter first, and then I mixed my batch, and then I put it on top of the honey and let it go. And I added to it, I didn't degas it. I added nutrients to it as I went in baby food jars to pour it on top. And I let the yeast cake sit on top and eat its way down.
All right. Bert Mayer is asking, are additives pre-fermentation or post-fermentation usually avoided, such as like acid additions, tannin additions, or anything else?
I would never do any of those pre-fermentation. I would treat them as you would any other mead. If you have something that you feel needs a little acid, I wouldn't shy away from that. I wouldn't just like, oh, this is Polish, I can't do that. I would just, go as you would as your normal process.
I do all my tweaking on the back end.
What's that?
I do everything on the back end.
Exactly. Yeah. But I wouldn't not do it because, oh, this is Polish, I'm not supposed to do that. Treat it as you would every other mead.
Anybody else have questions?
Not at the moment. I'm sure another few will probably pop in as you guys keep talking. Scott, could you talk about some of the Polish meads that you had while you were on your trip in Europe?
Actually, yeah. So at Meads Cup, I got invited. Well, Bobby did too, but unfortunately couldn't go. But we got invited to go over and judge at the European Mead Championships and attend the European Mead Making Conference. And it was an absolutely incredible experience. We were sitting in this room with I don't know how many was there, 100 and some people there, almost all mead makers, and just this banquet feast, and everyone got to bring in their own meads, and everyone's just pouring, everyone's There's people from all these countries, and just you literally had to have a glass of water in one hand, because if you had two empty glasses, people would just be pouring mead into it the entire time. And which sounds like a great idea, but when you're there for about 5 hours, then that doesn't really work that well. But what I found, and we were kind of talking with Bobby and Sergio earlier, what I found about the commercial mead there is there's like a huge gap. There's like the top of the line. There's like the really, really good mead makers. And then there's not a whole lot of like middle hanging fruit. And then there's the maybe not so good stuff. Some of the stuff you'll find like at a farmer's market or someone selling on the street side. But the stuff over there, it was just, just the different flavors and the fruit the different fruit combinations that they would come up with. And like 5 years ago, if you told me I was going to be sitting someplace and loving all this buckwheat honey, I would have told you you're out of your mind. But just the way they handle it, and it's a different buckwheat, but it was just such an incredible character with it. And what I also found, you'd walk into like grocery stores or whatever, there's like shelves of just mead. Like you would come in and there would be like craft beer. There's a section that big of just mead in some of the stores. We went in one store that had meads from like 10 different countries, and that's all they sold. And you could buy a 10-liter jug of a Melavino mead for like $94. Walking out of there, just a big plastic jug. There's mead in boxes, like box wine. You can buy boxed mead over there. And it was kind of fun in that sense, that it's just much more prevalent, and you don't have to explain to everybody what it is you're drinking. It was kind of fun in that sense. But Bobby's going next year.
I missed out. Yeah, I got to go. If they have a conference next year, I want to try to go. I was bummed.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully they have one and we have one as well, but that's still to be seen, unfortunately. Unfortunately, I think it's still too early to say for sure. So let's see. We got a question here from James Michael. He's asking, how do you fully mix the honey and water for any of the Polish variants?
Well, Bobby had talked about, like, he, the one when you eat it, eats its way down. When I do mine, I typically start with fairly warm water, not necessarily hot water, but then once I get it mixed up, then I'll top it off with cooler water. And sometimes I'll even have to let it sit for a while to get down to pitching temperature. But I mean, with that much honey, it does, at least for me, it takes a little heat to get it all integrated together. I mean, I'm not saying boil it, I'm not saying cook it, but just.
No, definitely hot water.
Yeah, hot water, just to get it melted in, or get it integrated all together.
Yeah, usually I use a cordless drill and a paint stirrer.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Matthew Nielsen is asking, when we're talking about all these ratios, basically of 2-to-1, 1-to-1, are these ratios done by weight or by volume?
Well, I do them by volume, but if you want to go by weight, the honey to a gallon is 12 pounds. The water is 8 pounds. So you would figure 12 pounds for every gallon of honey and 8 pounds for every gallon of water.
They typically do volume, though.
They typically do volume.
All right. Josh Holbrook is asking, I've seen a talk by Scot before about using some dried fruits in some of his recipes. Is that something he does just to accentuate the complex age character, like promoting dried versus fresh fruit character, or is it traditional for Polish style mead makers to use dried fruits?
I do it to get the character that I want. Typically, like, you probably saw the presentation I did when I talked about my fig mead, where I use the dried figs as opposed to fresh figs. I just like that darker flavor. The mead I've got now that I'm drinking has dried figs. It's got medjool dates. I use dried cranberries in it. And it's just that I think, especially using the buckwheat, I think like a dried, darker fruit works better. I mean, I've also had some really great fresh cherry stuff with buckwheat, but just for what I'm going for and the ones I like, the dried fruit, the dried dark fruit character is kind of what I'm going for in the ones that I make. But I've had like Bobby's where he uses like the fresh cherry, the juice and the concentrate, and those are fantastic as well. It just depends on what you're going for. In my Polish, I just like that dark dried fruit character. Not raisins. Those are only for nutrients. Go ahead, Bob.
You could actually use both of them, you know, the dried fruit and the cherries, to get that different level of complexity.
Sure, absolutely.
You know, and you know what I do is with dried fruit is I wash them off just to get anything that's on the outside of them off, sulfites, dust, whatever, especially if I buy them in bulk. And then I just steep them in hot water, almost like tea. I use a potato masher to get all the sugars out and go with something like that. So if I were going to make, I don't know, we could play around with the recipe, Scott. So if you were going to make something with buckwheat, what would you do? What would you go? You know, your recipe.
As far as like amounts of honey,
like
or just what I would add to it?
What's that?
As far as what I would add to it, you know, if I was doing a Polish buckwheat, number one, I wouldn't use all buckwheat. I really like the combination with the bamboo. I think it's adds like a little bit of almost like a molasses, but a sweet. There's almost a little buckwheat character, but without the funk. And I think it still allows the best parts of the buckwheat to come through without having to let it age 3 years to get to it. So I like that combination added together. And like I said, I can really see cherries working with it, but I really like the figs and dates. And like I said, in this one, I had walnuts to this one because I like the character. I like the nuttiness it adds. And I think that nuttiness adds a little bit of almost like an oxidation character to it. You know, just an oxidation flavor, like the best parts of oxidation. I think I get a little of that with the walnut. I just like that nuttiness with it.
Yeah, so what do you do, 50-50 on the honey?
Yeah.
For the buckwheat to the bamboo?
50-50, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you could do it however you wanted. I mean, whatever you wanted, but that's what I did.
Yeah, so I have a couple in right now. So I just did one with buckwheat, and I used 24 pounds of buckwheat, and I used 2 cans of the Vinter's Harvest black currant.
Mm-hmm.
And then I topped it up to 6 gallons, and I was watching the British baking show. Funny. And somebody had a black currant licorice cake. So I said, I'm going to try this to do a black currant licorice mead. And I used the buckwheat, the black currant, and now I have it in secondary. And for tertiary, I'm going to add the licorice and see how that one comes out.
What are you going to do for licorice?
I actually got licorice root.
Okay.
So I'm going to put that in. And then I have one other one. I did 2 parts water, 1 part honey, but I mixed the honey. I used buckwheat, clover. I used buckwheat, clover, and Gardener's Melter's honey. So I used 12 pounds of Melter's honey, 6 pounds of buckwheat, and 6 pounds of clover. And then I used 4 gallons of water, but I steeped the water with Russian smoked caravan tea to get something different. So while the ratio is still Polish, I don't really know if that's a Polish mead, but with that ratio, I wouldn't put it under a historical, because it's certainly not. Experimental.
Yeah.
But just because we're doing that ratio, I still feel that I'm going to get that big mouthfeel. I'm going to get that high alcohol from it. I still get that, that good fermentation.
Sure.
It's going to have a little caramel to it, a little smoke. So I'll really be happy with the way that one comes out, I feel.
Yeah.
Maybe some American toast oak a little vanilla would really set that one off nicely.
That's what, I was kind of joking, but I literally had a barrel that I put under a table and forgot about it for 4 years. And so that is like just super over oak, all tannin, but in a 5-gallon batch, I can add a quart to it and have a really nice oak character come out of that. So, I've got a whole bunch of lemons, so I'm using it for lemonade.
So what do you usually use that one to oak everything, or what's your
I
preferred
have
method?
been since I discovered that barrel sitting there.
That's funny.
It's in a back room in my basement, and I shoved it under a table and literally forgot about it for 4 years.
Yeah. So I use a lot of barrels. You have a couple, I know.
Mhm.
I have, I think, 6 barrels. I have apple brandy, I have a rum, I have a bourbon, I have a rye, and I have a peat barrel. I have a sour barrel. I think I have one other one. But the bigger ones, what I've been doing is I've been doing polishing them, and I've kept them as like almost like Soleras, and I've been pulling out 3 or 4 gallons at a time and adding 3 or 4 gallons back.
Mhm.
So, that's been my thing. That I think you've had my raspberry blossom out of the
Yeah.
apple brandy barrel. So that one, I think I'm on generation 3 of a Solera on that one. So I've been pulling out. So next year when I come, I want to bring 3 or 4 bottles that I pulled out at different times so we can taste them.
I have a 15-gallon barrel now full of Krupnikas that I'm going to use as a Solera. Just pull out a couple bottles every year and then top it off.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing.
Mhm.
And I did one with sorghum honey. I did a sorghum. If anybody was at the East Coast Conference in, I think it was 18. Yeah, no, 19. I brought that, and I liked that batch so much. I got sorghum from, I think, Walker, when we had the sale at Walker. And I made a 25-gallon batch, and I put it in a fresh bourbon barrel. So I'm really looking forward to that one. I did it like a Polish style. Starting gravity was estimated about 1190. And I really like the way that one comes out. I have big plans for that.
We got to have more questions. I see that chat thing going crazy.
What's that?
So there's got to be questions. I see the chat thing going crazy.
Oh, I can't get it. I only have my cell phone here.
Yeah, there's there's more comments than anything else, but somebody did ask. I guess I'll adapt it into a question. Basically, what do you guys use to basically measure gravity, especially since a lot of like hydrometers and even refractometers, digital or analog, usually don't go past much past like 1170. So if you guys know that you're above that, do you guys take any readings, or do you use anything to take readings?
No, I estimate.
For that, I was fortunate enough. I have one of the Easy Dens. It's a digital gravity reader. It's a fantastic tool if you want to spend a lot of money. But you just take a syringe out and put it in it, and it reads it to your phone, and it goes much higher than any hydrometer or even a refractometer. But once you get to that point, it's kind of you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants anyway.
Yeah, you gotta have that really great starter built up when you start to get to those gravities. If you don't have the starter, you're not doing it with one package of 5 grams of yeast. That's
Right.
not happening.
I mean, even hydrating it isn't going to be enough. You've got to get it up and chugging before it goes in there.
Yeah, definitely. I easily a half-gallon starter.
Mm-hmm.
You
guys want to touch upon that? Like, what's the process for? I just saw the question actually come up that I was about to ask. What is your processes for getting starters going?
Normal yeast rehydration. I use a sous vide. I get it up. I'll probably use, if I was doing a 6-gallon batch, I would probably use between 20 and 25 grams of yeast. Go firm. My regular yeast nutrient I would put in. And, I would definitely make sure there's no temperature shock between. So I'll start the yeast, I'll start my starter, a couple hours before, so it has a chance to cool down. And I think that a lot of people, when they start it, we're going down, we're going to make a mead, we're going into the basement, we're going into the kitchen, we're going into the garage. And they grab the honey, and it's the first thing they do. And then they start, looking at it, and I got to build the starter. The starter, I always do a couple hours early because I want it to the same temperature. So after I mix my honey, I can put it in.
Do you just do straight water? Do you add any honey into your starter?
I add some honey, just a little bit, not really much, because I really want to proof it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, so I always make sure that it's flowing over. I use mason jars, half-gallon mason jar.
Mm-hmm.
So it's when it flows over the top, I know it's going pretty well. So I'll fill up the mason jar about 3/4. I have a little 2-gallon honey bucket. I put the sous vide on 104 degrees, make sure it's the right temperature.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're going through all this effort using all this honey. The least you could do, the cheapest thing you could do is a little patience. So there's no temperature shock, because temperature shock could really ruin the starter. And I know we all get impatient. You know, sometimes life happens, right? Screw it, I'll just throw it in. And you know what? That's where your mistake is.
Mm-hmm. I've done it on some of mine where I've added just a bit of honey and got it up, like Bob says, all the nutrients, and then put it in an Erlenmeyer flask on a stir plate too. Because I mean, I have one for when I, was home brewing, and I would do it for my beer, just to get it, make sure everything is stirred up. But then the same thing, let it settle out, get down to temperature, and then, and if it's too hot and you get in a hurry too, you can put whatever your vessel is in some cold water and bring it down to temperature as well. I mean, if you don't want to leave it not pitched, you can control that temperature. I mean, I wouldn't want to bring it down 60 degrees or anything like that, but if you're 5-10 degrees warm, you could put it in some cool water and bring it down fairly quickly.
Well, 5-10 degrees. My basement's probably 62. So if I rehydrated 104, that 40 degrees is going to shock it.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I'm saying if you just need to adjust that 5 to 10 degrees, then you could do it with cold water.
Yeah. Well, that's the first part of my brewing day, is making that starter.
Yeah, and alternatively, also you could use some of the must to slowly temper that the rehydrated yeast as well. Slowly adding a little bit into it every few minutes, to slowly bring that temperature down within an acceptable.
Oh, absolutely.
Range. I know at least Lalaman, I believe, always recommends nothing more than, I believe it's 14 degrees Fahrenheit, no more than a 14-degree difference between your must and yeast pitch. I'm always pretty anal about that. I always try to get it within a degree or two,
right,
just to make sure. But
14 seems like a lot.
I know it does, right? But yeah, that's what they have on most of their rehydration or yeast package instructions. Let's see. Michael Fry is asking, do either of you take any titratable acidity readings? And if so, do they do any adjustments because of that reading?
I do not. I am as low tech as you can get.
Except for the 2x4s, Scott's high tech.
2x4. Well, and my easy dens. Other than that, I am very low tech.
How about filtration? You guys handle, pass your Polish meads through any filtration? And if so, do you take it to any kind of a micron level?
I don't filter any of my meads.
I have one of the ones that's 1-to-1. So that's the 1-to-1 that I have. I tried to get it through a Bonvino. It's about a year old. So I said, let me try this. So I put the filters in, 5-micron filters. That thing went from 0 to max in 1 second on there. There was mead flying out through the plates all over my basement. And I was like, that's not working. 3. So I'll move it down to 1 filter, see if I can get it through. 1 filter was just as big as mess. So I will never again filter one of those Polish meads. It just couldn't pass through. There was so much residual sweetness. It just couldn't pass through the filter, a 5-micron filter.
Yeah.
Was it? I believe you and I had that a conversation about that exact experience you had, Bobby. But I forgot if I asked, was that mead already visibly clear, or was it still cloudy?
It was a tiny bit cloudy, but the fermentation's done. It's 18 months. It has a little bit of cloudy. It's translucent, I would say. You could see through it, but it's not. There's a thick haze, but it's not. It's not something that's considerably cloudy. I've had worse cloudiness that I filtered out with 1-micron filter, but this one, it wasn't even going through. It went from 0 to 30 on the Bovino in split second, as fast as, the water got out of the hose. That was done.
All right. James Michael is asking, do either of you guys use any clarification agents?
I have on most of my meads, I use super clear. On my Polish, I typically don't, because I tend to let them sit a year or better. And by that time, they're clear enough that I'm not really worried about it. Man, I know there's not a lot left in this one, but this is straight out of the fermenter. I just took a racking cane and pulled some out of the fermenter, and I would bottle that at that clarity. But I wouldn't be opposed to it. If you think it needs it, do it. But typically I let mine sit long enough that they don't need to be clarified.
The ones in the barrel really helps you out a lot.
Mm-hmm.
The oak always helps you. At least I feel, in my experience, they always help you on clarification. The one I was just talking about, I did not add any oak. I feel, I just wanted to see how it goes. It's still one of those that I'm in the experimentation stage. So, but that's one of the only ones that I have not done in a barrel. The rest that I've done in a barrel, I've never had to filter them.
Mm-hmm.
And super clear is something that I would use too, if it came down to it. So if you need it, use it.
As needed. I wouldn't, Bobby fell down.
Yep. Bobby's drinking coffee.
He's the only person I know that falls down sitting down. Let's see. Joe Lee is asking, do you guys ever do any sulfite additions when you do long-term barrel aging?
I do not.
I do not either.
I do not. And the reason we get back to this is, the micro-oxidation. I don't find that the micro-oxidation is a bad thing. And I think it adds complexity. It adds to the character. It adds to the taste. But it has to be in moderation. It can't be like Scott said. You can't leave that, 3/4 full for, 4 years and expect it not to get micro-oxidized.
Mm-hmm.
He's intentionally micro-oxidizing, and, the barrels do that. And that's one of the things that brings out, that's what makes those barrel-aged meads so special, is because they have that character of the barrel. They have that tiny bit of micro-oxidation, and it enhances the complexity and brings out the bouquet of the mead to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and let's see, John. Well, here's a two-part question from two different people, but they're kind of related. What size barrels are we talking about? And do you guys have any particular preference as far as the oak goes, as far as American, French, Hungarian, at different toast levels?
Personally, for me, I have 15-gallon barrels, and mine are American oak because I used to work at a distillery and I could order 15-gallon American oak barrels when the distillery ordered barrels. So that's where my preference came from. I could put them on the order. I didn't have to pay for shipping, and I got a really good price on them. If I had my preference, I would probably have an American, a French, and a Hungarian oak barrel sitting down here. I'd have like 3 different ones just that I could play with and go back and forth with. But I would, I wouldn't say if you could get one, I wouldn't hold out because I wanted the other. I would, if you can get one at a good price, I would take whatever you could get.
Yeah, so I have some American oak barrels. I have a distiller that I usually use, and they're very good to me. I get my barrels from Hill Rock Farm. They're a field to bottle distillery in upstate New York. But what I have noticed is that if I use cubes, I do mix the cubes because I feel that American oak is almost like a flabby oak flavor, where I get the French and Hungarian seem to be more defined. They seem to be more rigid. They seem to be, more uniform. So I feel that by mixing those, maybe American medium toast, American heavy toast, French medium toast, Hungarian medium toast, I get a more balanced and well-rounded oak. And, if you really think about it, next time that you have access to those, try, sucking on one of the cubes compared to another cube, one right after the other. And you'll be surprised. You're going to taste a huge difference in the oak. You might not think about it much in a beer, but when you taste that oak cube in your mouth and you put it in your mouth and your saliva gets on it and you feel the difference. I always felt that the American was a much big, wider, rounder flavor with, wasn't as defined, where the French was, super rigid. And I like the balance between the two.
Another way to test that is get like a baby food jar, fill it with mead, and put an American, a French, and a Hungarian oak in them and just let them sit for a while and then, be able to taste the actual mead.
Yeah, if you don't have any babies to give that food to, you could get those Martinelli apple juices.
Well, yeah, just because kind of, that size.
No, that's a great idea. I never had babies around my house, so I'm not really worried about it.
All right. Well, we're approaching the end of the hour. We got 3 minutes left or so, but do you guys want to leave any final notes to everybody listening?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. You go first.
Okay. So lately I've been into the big Polish traditionals. I probably have 9 or 10 done with all different honeys that we've had for the AMMA specials. I have the raspberry blossom that I got from Dutch Gold. I have the sorghum that I got from Walker. I did the basswood from Garner. I did the melter honey from Garner. I've done the gallberry honey that we got from the guy in Florida. I have the meadow foam that we got from Z Specialty. I've done the orange blossom from Be Seasonal. And I really like the fact that we have all of these honeys that no one else really has in the world, and that we have this opportunity to be like, I've never had an orange blossom Polish. I've never had a basswood Polish. And I really like the fact that I can make all of these things. And I feel like, when the Polish guys come over, and I've been fortunate enough where I had Merrick and Christoph come to my house, and I always watch them in wonderment when they get to taste something that they don't have. Mm-hmm. And it always made me feel great that I was able to make these things and have these guys have such a positive reaction to. So go out there, try the Polish meads. If you have problems and I can help you, message me, call me, whatever you got to do, I'll be more than willing to help you.
I guess the thing I'd like to leave with everyone is don't be afraid of them. Don't be afraid to try to make them. I mean, when I first started making mead, I was like completely intimidated by Polish meads. Number one, I didn't really understand them, but just say, oh God, I could never handle that much honey. And I mean, there's so much more access to honey now with the AMMA, right? I mean, with the prices you get there, you can afford to play around a little bit more than you used to. But I mean, just try it, and do not be afraid to try some oak. Do not be afraid to let it oxidize a little bit. I mean, you don't want to get, everyone thinks it's almost like wet cardboard. And I worked for UPS for 32 years. I am the world's most foremost expert on what wet cardboard is like. And oxidation is not wet cardboard, but it has these great sherry notes. It can get some nutty character. And if you just keep it in check and just watch it, leave some headspace in your secondary for a while, and taste it. When it gets to where you want it, then put it in a smaller carboy, top it off with something, and then watch it. But don't be afraid to let it go that way. It's not a flaw. It adds some great complexity. And I said, message me, Bobby. We'd be more than happy to help. But
absolutely,
don't fear the Polish. Well, fear the Polish mead makers. Don't fear the Polish mead.
All right, everybody.
All right,
thanks for coming.
Cool. Well,
and next year, we'll try it again.
Yep.
All right, very cool. Thank you to the both of you for sharing all the knowledge and answering everybody's questions. I'm sure everybody got a lot of little tidbits of really cool tips and tricks, and hopefully everybody has some great successes now making some Polish style mead. So thanks again, guys, and hope to see you guys soon.
Hey, thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
All right, so that'll end the first presentation for tonight. We will continue the AMMA MeadCon online at 10 p.m. So in about another 28 minutes, we'll get the next session started with Bernice Vandenberg from Moonlight Meadery. She'll be talking about mead marketing. So stick around. We'll keep everything going. I might kick everybody out into the waiting room. So that way we can have a little privacy setting everything up behind the scenes, but just hang on tight and we'll see you again in a few. Thanks everybody.